my work on schools, silence, inaction, and ignorance are as genocidal as the most overt acts and thoughts. So this genocidal continuum allows us to connect what seem to be simple acts like racism denial, white ignorance, white taking up of emotional space, white centering, and some of these other actions that I mentioned, to those actions that are perceived as more explicit, violent, or problematic that clearly lead directly to death. So post-racial racisms kill slowly through the exhaustion, mental distress, and physical degradation, silencing and erasure, and prolonged exposure to situations that yield no concern to those in power within a white supremacist system. Post-racial racisms also kill quickly through willful ignorance of institutional racisms involving security regimes, violence, and quote-unquote natural disasters and the like. So in closing, I want to pause for a moment to ask a few questions. Who can and should my analysis of the post-racial be aimed at? What purposes or goals does such research and critical commentary using a concept like the post-racial have? I ask these questions at a moment when I myself am wondering exactly this in regards to what analyses of racism do, what our academic work does, both in terms of what ways it might contribute to addressing racism and dismantling white supremacy on the one hand, and more significantly, how this work might contribute to moving us towards ways of being and relating to each other that involve decolonization and justice. So let me first make several qualifications that come from this personal process of working to listen and hear what analyses and commentaries by Black and Indigenous scholars and activists are saying, not only about racism, but about the type of work scholars do in their analyses of racism, as well as about how those of us who are non-Indigenous, non-Black, or non-people of color might hold more of the weight of struggles for survival on our backs to assist our brothers and sisters. First, even though it is true, I want to be careful describing the post-racial as death. Because when death creeps into conversations about racism, death clogs our vision, and the effect is often to repeat actions and practices that render certain people as less than human. I take my inspiration here from the insistence around this question in Catherine McKittrick's work, and I must also say her Twitter feed. So I follow Catherine. Used to be a Queens too. For example, in her article, Mathematics, Black Life, McKittrick points out that when Black peoples only come into being via racial sexual violence and death, death confirms the knowable, or Black objecthood. Here she's talking about the archives of the Black diaspora and representations of slavery and the accounting of slavery in those archives. And it's mathematics of the unliving, she calls it, quote, mathematics of the unliving. It's enumeration and evidence of Black death and suffering. This mathematics disguises the untold, i.e. the Black human being. It obscures the iterations of Black life that cannot be contained by Black death. So to quote McKittrick, what is not there is living. And to paraphrase, what is not there in the archive of death, in its numbers, is living. So as she asserts, Black absented presences, so the unseeable, the invisible, the uncountable, and the unindexed in that archive, are always there in the archive and must open us up to new, unanticipated ways of imagining the human and thus of thinking the present anew. So let me take a more recent example that extends this thought to the question of research. So she tweeted this in January. If the research outcome records abuse, racism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, etc., we are asking the wrong questions. Come on, people. McKittrick's provocation gets right at the core of what our research may end up doing. Race-critical or critical sociological study of the post-racial must not simply seek to further record, expand, enumerate, or describe what post-racial racism is, so that others who aren't aware of it now become aware. We often do this as though outlining the ways the system works and sharing this analysis in a research journal, conferences, or research archives contributes to more knowledge on race and racism. It may produce knowledge, but what kind of knowledge is this? What does it do and to what use is it put? Do we put such knowledge into practice to move us towards something new? In what ways do our constructions of the object of knowledge hinder rather than help us move toward other ways of thinking and acting? There's often an implicit belief here that leads to the sentiment that if we accurately identify the operations of racism and trace its characteristics, we have come closer to knowing this thing, where knowing is critical and useful for politics. And thus, this criticality and usefulness is addressing the issue. In other words, I take seriously critiques of critical scholarship that argue it must not work to reproduce the very narratives and structures that we believe we are critiquing. This is a very difficult thing to sort of account for when we do our work. But I have no doubt that it's important to trace post-racial racisms, to draw out their spatial differentiations, connections, and relationalities, or else I wouldn't be here in front of you speaking this evening. But I still struggle with the work. So I'll close with the question that bugs me every day, is what is the use of the post-racial as a concept or framework of analysis? How long are we going to continue to provide more evidence about that which we already know to be true? And finally, if we know post-racial thought and action is racism, how do some of us as critical scholars go from enumerating evidence of such racism towards articulating concrete, sustainable struggles against white supremacy? Thank you.
So now we're going to take questions and answers, I think,
Sure.
and he is going to facilitate that.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah. Okay, I don't have a clock here, so I hope
I have
I
it.
don't see anybody asleep in the back. That's good. Sure, please, any questions that you have about what I've said tonight? We're opening up for conversation. We can have a discussion and conversation.
Well, I will start.
Okay, thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for that talk and for agreeing to come. And I was really pleased that you said yes. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you a couple of things about the Canadian context and particularly the so-called Trump effect, but thinking about how Canada positions itself within North America.
Mm-hmm.
And can you say a little bit more about Canada's educational policies vis-a-vis African or Afro-Canadians, but also Indigenous Canadian First Nations?
Sure, okay, so...
as a post-racial kind of thing.
Yes, okay, so I'm still also, like, I've been in Canada for a while, and I'm still in the process of learning about these very things. So I will tell you what I know at this point, or what I've come to learn from some of the reading I've been doing and what I've seen. I guess one thing to sort of say is that in relation, especially we just had Black History Month, and a lot of people have come to challenge. So you see a lot of scholars writing in very accessible venues that Black history is Canadian history. That was the title of several different articles that people have written. So we're still in this point in time, well, Canadians are still in this point in time, not necessarily seeing Blackness as a spatial aspect of Canadian history, even though Black Canadians have been there for a very long time. So you have a couple different ways in which that's treated. Scholars like Ronaldo Walcott have discussed this in his book, Black Like Who. Catherine McKittrick talks about this, and there are quite a few other people that talk about race in Canada from a variety of different perspectives. So the legal system, you have someone like Barrington Walker. Black populations are either treated as those who had gone to Nova Scotia as loyalists who fought with the British and are considered to be an early Black population. I believe that's in the 1700s, right? So around the time of the American Revolution. So you see that early population is considered sort of, when people think of Black Canada, they think of this early population. Or they think of post-World War II immigration from the Caribbean and increasingly from African countries. So those are the two ways in which Blackness is sort of conceived in the popular imagination, if it's conceived at all. So the multicultural post-World War II, and then this sort of older community that has been there for a while. But a lot of people don't know about that history. For example, until I moved to Alberta, I did not know that the Alberta provincial government went to Oklahoma and recruited African Americans to go up to Alberta with very nice pictures of sunny, no snow, plains, open plains, no people, right? The representation of like an open space. Come and settle here. it's better than down there, or whatever. So you had over 1,000 people that went and formed communities in the early 1900s in Alberta. My students, when I brought this up in my education class, Education and Society, they were not aware of that. So I showed them, the CBC had some discussions of what it means to be Black in Canada, and they have different segments. So one of them was on, they're called Black Pioneers. So you see sort of two sort of implications here. You see, come to Canada, it's better, but come because we need people to settle. Come because you can also be part of our settler colonial project. So you are Black settlers within our settler colonial project. So there's these sort of layers of that, the racialization and colonialism there. But then you also experience racism here in Canada. Edmonton was a very active KKK center. And they used to have meetings downtown in a very large building that is no longer there into the 1930s, I believe. People are investigating this history, so a lot of it is still being uncovered. People are going to look at sort of, they're doing like human library projects and going to talk to elders about their experiences. So to say that the racist posters that have appeared at the University of Alberta or in Edmonton over the last year are the Trump effect is a form of racial exceptionalism, right? So you sort of say, well, we didn't have this in Canada. It's not to say that the discourse that comes from the United States does not embolden, so we see a resurgence of the right in a lot of places in the world. But it's not where it came from, because it's always been there. Like, settler colonialism is the founding project. So when you have that as your founding project, racism and colonialism and these forms of genocide are already there on the land in that space. So people are working on improving that. So there's been some efforts to try and get Black Albertan history into the curriculum. So people are sort of working on those kinds of efforts right now. Those are nascent efforts. In places like Toronto, you see movements for Afrocentric schooling and things like that. So there's a larger Black population, and they're from various places. And so you see a movement for people who are African Canadians from African countries, as well as some people of Caribbean descent, working around issues of Afrocentric schools and things like that, but also doing anti-racism work in the curriculum. And it's been several decades that people have been working on that, trying to make that question visible. And one other thing I should mention is that the narratives of the Underground Railroad are very strong, that a lot of people helped enslaved Africans in the United States come to Canada as sort of a move to freedom. And there's still a strong element to that narrative that, even though in Southern Ontario there were segregated schools, even though in Nova Scotia there were segregated schools, and people did experience a lot of discrimination and violence and, even like attacks and things like that. So that tells you a little bit of that element there. But there is a very active, Black Lives Matter Toronto is very active in relation to the police violence question, among others. So they're doing a lot of good work too. So if you go to their Facebook page, you can see the kinds of issues that are shaping the politics in that city, but that speak to larger questions in Canada, more generally around anti-Black racism.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, your name?
My name is Susanna.
Susanna.
I have a question for you. I'm really curious about the whole, post-racial research, and I think that, to my understanding, a lot of the, the research and the conversation, all of that, it kind of revolves around, in my opinion, like a black-white paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, like, how much conversation and effort really do you see going into Indigenous peoples or the other, right?
Yes, the question was about this black-white paradigm seemingly being what's driving a lot of the post-racial. I think I'm trying to make the linkages. So, by linking racism denial and sort of colonialism denial. So if you talk about the similarities and differences in conversation, it's very difficult to have a conversation in certain classrooms or in certain contexts in Canada about being a settler, right, with some people. because then that implicates them in colonization and living on land that is not theirs. And so I would put that as part of what Shireen Razak and others have called that sort of white racial innocence. So, so white racial innocence is both involved in, I'm not a racist, if you're talking about anti-black racism, or, yeah, but I didn't, you know, like we've been here for a long time, and my family's been here for 7 generations, and I'm, you know, I don't have anything to do with what's happened to indigenous peoples that like was in the past. So I see those as related forms of discourses, but we have to account for that I'm not trying to equate those forms of racism, like anti-indigenousness with anti-blackness, but that they're both happening simultaneously in the same places. And so, but the way their histories are different, but in interactions they get expressed often in the same kinds of ways. But the question of settler colonialism involves also implicating settlers of color, right, into that analysis. So, and black settlers too, who are differently positioned, right? So not all settlers are the same in that sense, and not all settlers have ended up in a place for the same historical reasons. But I think if we focus on the question of the sort of values and practices associated with liberal development of liberalism and liberal democracy, we see a racial contract. We see the sort of notion of open land, which is open to colonization and habitation, because the way people treat land is not productive, quote unquote, right? So indigenous people aren't productive on the land in the ways that we see productivity in our vision, so we will then take that land and make it productive. All of these are linked to questions of the development of capitalism and to liberal ideals, right? So those things are sort of intertwined there, and all of these different forms of dispossession and racism and violence, in a sense, are expressions of that broader structure, those discourses. So I wasn't trying to imply that they're the same thing, and I'm not trying to imply that the post-racial goes along the black-white binary, but that, you know, in the United States right now we see so Islamophobia would be another aspect to be brought in. So some people like, I think Andrew Smith and others have talked about various pillars of white supremacy. So you have like anti-blackness, you have settler colonialism, you have Orientalism and war, so the imperialist side. So I think people are trying to figure out how these things relate to each other within a larger question of white supremacy, and a lot of work is still being done on that because that determines how we try to address the situation, right? How we understand these different, historically different formations. And to the fact that, you know, one thing that, you know, there's a question of linkages to the land, right, with indigenous issues, and so a lot of it is about relations on the land with other people, but also in relationship to the land itself. So how do we think about remaking those relations as a means of getting outside of, or getting away from perspectives that would deny that colonialism is still an issue, in the same breath as they express negative stereotypes about Aboriginal people in Canada, for example. So it's not only that binary. And does that help answer the question, or can I say more about that? Do you have a follow-up?
I was just wondering, like, you know, indigenous peoples, Hispanic peoples, just how much, you know, are they included in that whole, you know, the conversation, the research, I mean, everything that's going into this post-racial, how much of the other is included in that? Because, like I said, it's, you know, we're always talking about black-white relations when we talk about cultural diversity, but what about all of the others in between? That was, like, you know, I think maybe a good example would be, you know, you're talking about, you know, the white innocence when the Dakota Pipeline, when those people were, they started out in their protesting and it started to gain attention. You know, they were coming at it with the rhetoric of the sacredness of the land, and I didn't think anybody was getting that. And it seemed like it wasn't until it became water and everybody's problem that the momentum just built on that, right? So it didn't seem, you know, like just the post-racialness, just the concept of racial thinking and being inclusive of indigenous peoples, it just seems like it's kind of lagging or way behind.
Oh, I would have to say, I mean, in terms of like, if you look at the sociological studies, like, there's a tremendous degree of invisibility of indigenous peoples in some of the scholarship, and in what is the relationship to of settler colonialism to the sociology of race and ethnicity, for example, in the United States. I think that indigenous peoples are often invisible in some of that scholarship. People are correcting that, and I don't know if the best scholarship comes out of, like, let's say, sociology or anthropology. It might come out of what is broadly termed like American Studies, which is a conference that has that deals with a lot of these types of questions. So I don't think, I mean, I'm hoping that I didn't repeat that sort of invisibilization, because what I was trying to do was say that part of that innocence is the question of settler colonialism. But you're right, you know. So where do Latinos fit? So within the Latino community, also there's a struggle, a recent struggle over the past however many years to gain visibility for Afro-Latinos, which is precisely when the census starts opening up categories of classification or has proposed for Latinos. So like Latinos can identify as a variety of different categories. And so, you know, so the Latino community itself, like for example, if you're talking about communities from Central America or Mexico or even Latin America, you're talking about people who are also, a lot of people who are also indigenous. Like, if I'm not mistaken, some of the immigrant communities that were sort of living precariously in California didn't speak Spanish. They were speaking indigenous languages, which were their native languages. So there's a lot of different aspects to this, and it's with that stereotyping and that narrowing of the discourse where Latino gets imagined to be one type of thing. You know, you know, so the question also of like, so others, so if you talk about like Islamophobia, so where does that sort of fit into the framework? And I think in Canada, rather than a black-white cultural diversity, you see more like, you know, South Asians are pretty visible, like when people think, oh, Canadian cultural diversity, like Sikhs, for example, have a visible presence in this whole diversity mosaic. You know, so you have people of African descent, Asians, East Asians, so Chinese and Koreans and things like that. So those people do appear there in those constructions. I think in Brazil, the race literature for a long time, some people have done work on sort of the hyphenated communities, like the different Euro communities that moved to Brazil, and sort of trying to say, well, we keep talking about this racial mixture thing, and it's black and white predominantly, but also indigenous. So some people have said that some societies in Latin America, it's a continuum and binary between black and white. In others, it's the indigenous white that constitutes the mestizo. So it also depends on where you go and how other populations become invisible in some of those studies. So I think the post-racial framework could be made more complex in that way, but right now, in terms of how I'm working on it, and I'm not even sure like the idea of the post-racial, I'm still struggling with like how do we make it do the work it needs to do. I'm sort of thinking along the lines of what is the intersection between Islamophobia, settler colonialism, anti-black racism in a place like Edmonton, for example. So trying to link my work more locally. So yeah, so this is an ongoing thing, and that's a great question. You know, we need to understand how our frameworks can also simplify things or also not include certain populations that are in there, and that's definitely important.
Thank you.
Thank you. I saw a hand over there. Yes.
I wonder if we can go back to the issue of schooling. In your opinion, what's the core difference between an anti-racist pedagogy as opposed to a post-racial pedagogy?
That's a very good question. I have never thought of like, you know, what is a post-racial pedagogy? I mean, you know, there's also discussions about anti-racism and those approaches. I sort of came at this initially from the question of decoloniality. So that was sort of when I was in training, right? A lot of the stuff I was reading was coming out of the decolonial work being done in Latin America. And so you're talking about like epistemological questions. So the marginalization of other forms of knowledge, other ways of being, and then how that becomes also a material question. Because there are other ways of relating to other living beings as well as to each other that are cultural and epistemological. So I think an anti-racist pedagogy is that we must continue to name race and continue to talk about how race is significant and the different ways in which it shapes people. So, you know, through culture, something that seems to be a reference to culture but is actually a reference to race, for example. So anti-racist pedagogy is about that, is about continuing to educate about those types of structures and how that shapes, for example, schooling, and silencing in the curriculum, self-fulfilling prophecies. I mean, you can see, like, the thing with some of these questions too is like, I came across last year, and I wish I could remember the venue, stories of graduate students of color, like the way that their professors would talk to them in class versus the way they talk to other students, which undermines sort of confidence that they had the ability to like understand concepts, for example. And so anti-racist pedagogy is about talking about how that is a problem and continuing to name that problem. Post-racial pedagogy, I guess, is pretending that race is not an issue and sort of going along with the question of education as though things like tracking or silencing are not necessarily due to race, but could be disguised as like, well, you know, this is part of our official curriculum and committees have discussed this and it's official, they've decided and this is what we have to learn. To believe that the official knowledge is in itself a knowledge that represents everyone, like let's say in history, for example. So if we would call a post-racial pedagogy something, it might be that. But also related to the question of whiteness, right? So liberalism teaches we are educated as white subjects. We, and I'm talking about me and other white people, just as male. We are educated to feel that we have certain rights and to know that we have certain rights, and that those rights will often be upheld. That we can circulate in spaces without certain problems. That we can speak, and sometimes someone like me can speak and not necessarily have someone question whether I have authority. So those things teach me how to be and act in the world. And then you come to take things for granted to the degree that they become normalized. So, in a sense, the post-racial aspects of liberalism are pedagogical in that sense, right? Because we're constantly doing things that reinscribe that. And so I see that as sort of a form of pedagogy also. It teaches us how to be. We learn how to function in the world. We gain our understandings of the world. Because we can walk up the stairs every day and never notice if there's not a ramp to come into the building. Or if this is an accessible entrance, I don't know, right? In fact, I didn't even notice that coming in. And I try to, and you try to become more conscious of those things. So that's sort of the normalization of that, I think, is the pedagogical element of how this racist structure, as well as, ableist and white supremacist in general, tends to work.
One more question?
Sure, yeah. There's someone in the back there. Yeah, we can take one more question.
I might have missed it, but I didn't hear Obama's name mentioned at all. And so I'm just curious as to the lack of...
Obama?
Yeah.
Well, I don't want people to, like, in Brazil, there's a term called saudade, which is like to feel both loss and longing for something. So I don't want you all to feel saudade for Obama because the saudade should not be as strong as it is right now. And we can get into a conversation about the fact that the structure that has basically been put into like hyper action was already in action. And it's been in action. It maybe had been in action already for hundreds of years, but it's really been in action since the neoliberal turn, starting with Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton and all the stuff that Reagan brought in. Like so we can go back and trace that. Now, in terms of the question of in terms of the question of what's different about now, things are more blatant. And what was it? It's Kim Tallbear, who's a colleague of mine at University of Alberta, said that the difference between Obama and Trump is that the emperor has no clothes now, right? So, but what Obama represented was, I remember, if you're all familiar with the show like The Wire or Treme, David Simon, who writes some very good stuff. When Obama was elected, he he wrote this thing about post-racial, right? So he said, you know, like, we can, this is a guy, I mean, if you watch his shows, it's like, race is kind of in there in pretty much everything he writes. So he was talking like about how we can try and enjoy this moment and what it represents, right? And so that was a moment of elation for a lot of people. And I think that people imagined that this represented what, and Sui Cho talks about this, that the post-racial is not like the colorblind, because the post-racial demands an event that marks a moment. So this happened, and now, you know, we have transcended, like there's a moment that happens. And for many people, Obama was that moment. But it was not that moment, because as soon, they were questioning his citizenship and everything up until he was elected. And then afterwards, you know, I mean, the racist signs and the way that the internet, the spike in white supremacist organizations, and a year after Obama was elected was, I don't know, like 1,000% or something. Don't quote me on that percentage, but it was high. Like, if you look at the chart, so I think Southern Poverty Law Center does research on that. So, you know, a lot of people gave Obama a lot of space to do his work because, you know, coming out of the George Bush years, for many he was a sort of relief. He represents a different kind of politician. He represents someone who is young and accessible, savvy user of social media, and appearing on talk shows and things like that. So he connected with people in a different way. And, you know, then people started to wonder, well, wow, wait, was this our post-racial moment or was it not? And so then that sort of started to unravel that was possibly the post-racial moment, or that transcendent event. And I think that now we see that it wasn't. We see that having someone like Obama and Michelle Obama in the White House changed some people. You know, if you think of young children and seeing what they feel they could become in society, and gaining self-esteem and ideas about, you know, what black womanhood can be in this country. We saw some positive cracking of some of those aspects of racism, but overall, you know, I think people are still thinking, okay, that was not our post-racial moment, and starting to realize that a lot of this, like, deportation stuff and a lot of these different things, the structures were set up for that post-9/11 and expanded, drone programs and things like that. I mean, it's really unfortunate because, you know, you saw some very positive things that were done also, like the Affordable Care Act and some of these other things, right? So you have to balance the critique with some of the things that were actually able to help a lot of people. But at the end of the day, when we talk about sort of the more imperialistic elements, some of the structural racism aspects, militarization of police, which he tried to, I think eventually he sort of tried not to have a lot of the equipment being transferred, which I think they're going to try and repeal. You know, it's more contradictory when you look at it sort of in retrospect. Although I was not, personally I will say that I did not, I understood what that meant. I understand what that meant for a lot of people, both black and white, for different reasons. Like, it meant different things to those people. But early on, I was sort of like, I'm going to wait to see how this plays out before I start thinking that we've sort of reached a particular point in our so-called progress. Because I don't know if that progress if the type of progress that was imagined with his election can actually happen in the system that we're dealing with right now. So, that the system that we have. Do you have any follow-up question?
Well, I'm just curious because racism, post-racism, it seems so either or instead of gradations of, you know, we partially move in the direction of a post-racial future or present. And I say this only because I think I was reading a New Yorker article, and it was early in Obama's presidency, and a reporter had gone up to Harlem, and there was a small, you know, child who was wearing a leather jacket with the presidential seal on the back of it, and the writer of the article said that they felt as if that was a post-racial moment, because that would not have occurred in any iteration prior to Obama's presidency. And so folks in, you know, Harlem and stuff like that, experiencing, you know, a reality, post-racial reality different than, you know, a white person like myself. I don't know, I guess I'm struggling with the idea that we haven't moved at all, you know, in something of a post-racial direction. But maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're.
No, I think that that the fact that you're struggling with that is actually the most important thing there, right? Because you know, we can't leave it behind. Like things are not getting better for a lot of people. They just trampled on an indigenous group that was saying, this is our land, you can't build a pipeline. They sent police from various states to do it. Because protecting corporate interests is more important than protecting people's water. Although they did protect the people in Bismarck's water by moving the pipeline. So I'm not dismissing that. I understand what you're saying, because you know, you sort of have to ask yourself and think, you know, are things getting better? Like, I feel like things are getting better. So if you're talking about the question of how people might see possibility and how that young child might feel, there's no doubt that that young child wearing that jacket, that's important for that young child, and that they may have been transformed as a person through having Obama be elected. But, you know, there have also been alongside the sort of celebratory aspects of it, within the Black community itself, critiques from Black scholars sort of saying, you know, we need to be a little more critical. But how do you criticize the first Black president in a country that is anti-Black at its core? It makes it difficult to sort of critique without, to sort of do a constructive critique in a situation that's already racist, like in a structure that's already racist. So that's an ongoing and debated thing.
Amiri Baraka's contention, though, is that like an Obama coalition has to stay, you know, together in order for real progress to be made. And so Baraka, though he may not have, you know, appreciated all of, all the things that were happening with the first Black president, he still understood that for real progress to be made, there has to be, you know, some foundation set, so to speak.
I think so. I think that that to have, okay, for there to be progress, there have to be foundations set. I think that obviously this is not necessarily also a question for me to sort of give a final opinion on in terms of how, let's say, the Black population feels about Obama. But I will say that, you know, it depends on your notion of social change. If you think that if you think that slow progress is a way to go, or if you think that more rapid change is needed, or some balance between the two, then we can sort of think about it in that way. Now, yeah, and I know that there you know, like someone like Cornel West was more critical of Obama, and then Michael Eric Dyson. So they have debated themselves some of these questions, and so. In terms of more generally, like as an individual looking at policy, I can have certain critiques. But what this has meant overall for Black Americans is something that Black Americans are talking about. So perhaps going there and looking for what people are saying and the different things that people are saying would give you might give you a better picture, might give us a better picture of this contradictory outcome of the 8 years, right, and what that actually meant. But I do think that and this is the question of exceptionalism again, if you step outside of the United States, if you live in Yemen, they probably don't care whether the president was Black or not, right? So, because their only experience of the United States is through the arsenal that was sold to Saudi Arabia. So I think it depends on who you ask and where. It doesn't mean that stuff here hasn't changed internally. But the U.S. to a lot of people outside the United States is still an imperial force that you know, drops remote control bombs on people. And there's high civilian casualties. And no one has been talking about it for a couple of years now. Really like giving it sustained attention. And so it's those gaps and it's those silences that sometimes reveal, you know, some of the aspects of the exceptionalism. So I don't want to end on such a down note, because, you know, this is not. Sorry. Oh, is that okay? Are people okay? Because I see a hand in the back. Can I take one more question? I don't mind doing it.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, I just, you know, you made this comment about what Barack Obama meant to Black Americans. I like to posit, and Americans because they went to the polls also to vote for him. One of my colleagues asked me the day after, well, how do you feel now that we have, you know, a black president? And I turned around and said, how do you feel? You know, I know how I feel. I mean, I got it. But how do you feel after having centuries of a man in the White House who represented you? You see, so there should be conversation, some conversation about what Barack Obama meant to whites.
Yes. Yeah, okay, so that's a very good question.
And other ethnicities, but
Other groups.
definitely for the white population.
And he meant, I mean, yes, so what did Obama mean for whites also? So if you
I
watch
would say
it,
that should be a conversation.
it should be a conversation, yes. And if you saw in Chicago, for example, the footage on the night of the election, so many whites also crying and elated and excited about that. Perhaps it made them feel like their country had made progress, just like it might have made other people feel like it had made progress. And yeah, and there's different opinions in the white community also, among whites, I guess I'll say, because the community is sort of a homogenizing term, but like among the white population, what they might think about that. You know, I mean, we know that a lot of whites were not happy about it because, you know, the Tea Party, is that when the Tea Party emerged? I can't even remember now.
Yeah.
You know, so they emerged around that time, and they had a lot of racist signs and sentiments to say, but there were also a lot of white people excited about it. So kind of like what I said earlier, you know, it could have meant for a lot of people that, oh, finally, like, we have achieved this point, and we have a black president, and things are going to get better for African Americans. Like, white people could have felt that.
For America.
Yeah.
Not only for African Americans, but for America. That's where the seismic shift occurred. Psychologically, emotionally.
Yeah, I mean, but this is, again, I'm going to go back to, so there was a seismic shift in how people might have felt about America or the United States. But that's part of the exceptionalism, right, in that sense. So there's a tension there because it is, for that to happen is unprecedented, you know. But then to go 8 years later and to see the result of what that is, then we might have to say that, well, we could say that the resurgence and retrenchment of that hope and that promise, where an extremely competent woman could not get elected, which reveals that actually in the United States, there were a lot of conversations about how gender-wise it's awful in politics, even compared to a lot of, like, I don't know, there's like 60 some odd countries ahead of the United States in terms of like women in politics and in high leadership positions. So, you know, I don't know. Like, see, this is the thing. I'm going to leave it open because it's interesting. Like, I've been watching actually the last part of this whole thing from Canada, because I was in Canada when Obama got elected. So. It's interesting to see also how that it gets interpreted from the outside. But yeah, I don't know. Like, was it? I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that question in the affirmative, actually.
I'm just saying that should be a conversation.
It should.
And you're right to leave it open.
Yeah, I think it should. That is a great conversation. What did that mean for people?
Exactly.
You know, it shouldn't just mean that now we're sad he's gone. We should say, what did those 8 years actually mean? And what was going on during those 8 years? How did we feel about different things that were done? You know, I think that is a conversation that the news cycle and the fact that we're in another moment doesn't let us actually contemplate. So thank you. That was a very good point.
All right. Well, thank you so much.